Hi everybody, my name is Elle and I'm the host of this podcast where I speak with the stewards of conservation about their often underrepresented roles in science and in wildlife education and research. My hope is that by giving these roles visibility, it will amplify their voices and inspire people about roles that they might not have ever imagined. I also hope that we can enter into a dialogue about how we can save the planet, and all of these conversations might lead to some actual tangible outreach. To help us do that today, I am speaking with ornithologist and wildlife researcher Jack Baddams. I really loved this conversation because it's all about birds. I really hope that even if birds are not your number one thing, that you stay to listen to what Jack has to say as he illuminates a really fascinating insight to bird ringing and the natural world. It gives me great pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for your time this evening. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to learn about you and to learn about the work. I'd love to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself rather than me doing it for you.
Okay, well, my name is Jack Baddams, and I am, generally speaking, it's the birds that people know me for. So I talk about birds a lot on social media. I am involved in bird ringing, so catching and tagging them. But I also work on wildlife telly as a wildlife researcher and do lots of other things. I got fingers in lots of pies, but generally I'm a bird guy.
Okay, well, you can tell me all about the fingers in pies and all the other endeavors that you get up to. But before we talk about the present day and the roles that keep you busy, let's wind it back a bit. Take me back to what the world looked like when you were little. When did you first start noticing the natural world?
So this is a bit of a family legend that I'm about to tell you now. So the legend in my family is that bird was my first word. I do not know whether this is true or not. I don't know whether this is true.
Take it.
Certainly, by the time that I was, I think it was like 3 or 4, I could identify most of the birds in the garden. The thing that was really quite baffling is that none of my family no one was interested in birds. My parents didn't know, had never heard of a chaffinch, didn't know what a dunnock was. They just had this kid that would prop himself up on the window of the living room and point at the birds in the garden. And all credit to them, they had no idea what to do, but they just kept feeding me bird books and putting nature shows on TV because I reacted to them and I liked them. And I guess they just thought that this would go away. They've said that they just thought that, we would feed this phase and it would go away. Because I do think all kids have got an intrinsic interest in nature, and they just fed it. They kept feeding it over and over again. And whenever we went anywhere, we would have to go to a bird park or a nature reserve or wherever there was birds. We would have to go. And then, so I just read all these books and basically self-taught it. And then we joined the Clumber Park Bird Group when I was 10 years old. And that was really when I met bird watchers for the first time. And of course, they were all like 50 years older than I was. But it was amazing to meet people that I could talk to about birds that were, adults, and like the people I'd seen on TV talking about birds. So I don't really know why birds. I don't know, because I don't remember a time where I didn't like them. So it's just been there forever and hasn't gone away.
I mean, you're speaking my language. I wish I had a bird buddy when I was little. Okay, so when I was doing some research about you and the biography that you provided, there was a kind of mention of bird ringing starting quite early in your childhood. So talk to me a little bit about why you got into that. I mean, it's probably obvious to our listeners that birds was a big thing from day dot, but why bird ringing specifically? And also for those that might not know specifically what that is, what is it used for? And give us a little bit of a crash course.
Okay, so I'll explain what it is. So bird ringing is the process of catching and tagging birds, because what we want to know about is we want to learn about birds as individuals, because there's loads of studies you can go out and you can survey how many birds they are. You can survey singing birds, you can survey flocks of birds in the winter, and you can get an idea of population estimates. But one thing that we really want to know is we want to know about them on an individual level. So we want to know how can you prove that a bird has gone from one place on Earth to another place on Earth without knowing that it's the same bird? One of my favorite, I always try and find a way to cram this story in when I'm talking about bird ringing to the public, is back in the day, people used to think all sorts of stuff back in the day. People used to think swallows overwintered in reed beds. People used to think that redstarts transmorphed into robins. People used to think that all sorts of stuff to explain where birds went. And one of the first times that people actually sort of realized, hang on, maybe the birds are going somewhere else, was in continental Europe. They have a bird called a white stork. Big bird, nests on buildings and villages in towns in places like France and Spain and Germany and things like that. And the storks would disappear in the summer, at the end of the summer, and they would go to Africa. But people didn't know that. We're talking sort of like 1400s, 1500s. People didn't know where they'd gone. But they'd appear again in spring. And one spring, one came back with a spear right through its neck. But it was flying, and it landed on the roof of the village and started building its nest. And because we're talking about, back in the day when colonialism was a thing and all this sort of stuff, they recognized the spear. They were like, that's an African spear. So what they did in classic good old days naturalist style is they shot it, stuffed it, put it in a museum. But you can see this stork in a museum in Germany, I think it is. And they gave it a name. They called it the file stork, the arrow stork. And there has since been, I think, 9 different examples of arrow storks coming to continental Europe. And the reason I tell this story is it was one of the first instances that people connected the fact that when the birds left them, they'd gone somewhere else. So all that to say that what we're doing with bird ringing is a lot less intrusive method of tagging them with some sort of identifiable feature. And we're putting little metal rings on their legs that weigh no more to the bird than your phone does in your pocket. And that allows us to work out where they go, how long they live. Another thing I get told all the time is I get people saying, oh, I've had a lovely little robin in my garden for 10 years. And I have to say, no, I don't think you have. You've probably had about 5 robins because they only live for about 2 years. So anytime you get a bit of information on how long birds live, that's come through bird ringing. It's us getting to understand that sort of thing. And we also, when we've got them, we can take biometrics. We can see when they're coming into breeding condition. We can see how much fat they're carrying. We can see all sorts of stuff. So it just gives us a much more intimate level of learning about birds. And I got involved with it back when I was 16. And the great thing about bird ringing in the UK is it's run by the British Trust for Ornithology, and anyone can get involved with it. You do it as a volunteer. You do it in your spare time. And as long as you've got the dedication to get up at the crack of dawn week after week after week and learn how to do this, it takes about 2 or 3 years to learn how to do this. So it takes a lot longer than it does to learn how to drive, which I always find quite interesting. You learn how to do this, and you can get a license to do it and collect this information for the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology. So I heard that there were some bird ringers local to me, and I think my grandma knew of them through some sort of group that she was in. And I just started going along when I was 16, and I met someone called Eleanor, and Eleanor was the person who sort of, I don't want to say took me under a wing, but she did. Took me under a wing, and she trained me. I've been doing it ever since. So basically half my life I've been bird ringing.
Wow. I mean, people are going to be thinking, and I'm here to ask probably the obvious and silly questions. How do you catch them? And does it hurt the birds?
No, very valid questions. So there's a couple of ways that you can catch them. We can catch birds in all sorts of ways. The key thing is all these ways have to be safe for the birds. Like we do not do everyone gets involved with bird ringing because they love the birds. And the last thing we want to do is anything that's gonna harm them. So the general way that we catch birds is through something called mist nets. So that's MIST, mist like the fog. And they're very, very fine nylon nets that are strung between 2 poles, a bit like a badminton net, strung between 2 poles, but goes to about a couple of feet off the floor. And they're so fine. And when the sun's not on them, and when they're not blowing in the wind, when it's nice and still, they're so still, that you put them between flight paths where birds are going to be moving, and they fly in, they drop into these little pockets, and then we come along and take them out. We check the nets very, very regularly, and we take them out, we pop them in little bags, and then we do the ringing process. The nets are so fine and so thin that people get caught in them all the time. Like, they're incredibly hard to see. Unless you've set them up and know exactly where they are, they're really difficult to see. But yes, you can use other traps and things, but all of that is, the birds don't get harmed in the process at all. Now, we can't pretend that it's not the weirdest experience of this bird's life. Like, let's not pretend that this is, that this bird's not a bit weirded out by the entire process. But they're not keeling over and dying. They're not breaking anything. We do the process incredibly quickly, and birds have been ringed now for decades and decades and decades, and we know that there are no serious effects on them whatsoever. I've got some birds whose ring numbers I've got memorized off the top of my head because I catch them so much, and I see them and I'm like, oh, hello, it's you again, the 6-year-old blue tit who's twice the age of an average blue tit, and it's ARD 6495.
Shout out.
Yeah. If you're listening, ARD 6495, this one's for you. But yes, it is, or everything is done to minimize the stress on the bird, and they don't come under any harm.
And presumably that is why a license is needed, as opposed to that being a mechanism like moth or butterfly trapping that someone can do in their own backyard.
Yes, exactly. It is, although when you say volunteer, I think the immediate thought is that it must somehow be sort of less skilled than something that's professional. I just think the word volunteer brings that to mind. And if any, like these volunteers, like I say, the training process takes 2 to 3 years. And the key thing that is drilled into you is the welfare of the birds. And if you're catching them in nets, you need to be able to safely extract them from the nets, and you need to know how to process them quickly and safely and calmly and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, Jack, so this was something that I had written for later in our conversation, but whilst we're on it, tell us about the pots. I love so much your videos. For those who haven't seen them, I cannot tell you how cute they are. I'll let you explain. Tell us about the pots.
So the pots are right. Let's workshop this. So we've caught our bird in our net. We've extracted. What bird do you want it to be, Al? What bird do you want this to be? But that's going to the size of the pot is going to depend on. It's
like asking me to pick a favorite child. I'm gonna go siskin.
Okay, siskin. So siskin, little finch, weighs about between 11 and 14 grams. So we're going to take our bird. We have taken it out of the net. We've taken it out of our bag, and it's now ready to be processed. So we've put a ring on it. We have aged it. We've worked out how old it is by looking at its feathers. We have sexed it. We've measured its wing, and then it's time to weigh it. And when it comes to weighing it, this is everybody's favorite bit. This is the bit I get all the comments on. I think it was the first comment you ever left on one of my videos. I think was about the pots. And so you take a pot, and the pot is something that there's no finer way of putting this. You stick the bird upside down in the pot, and it will just sit there, and you put it on some scales for only a few seconds till you get the weight. But the siskin would take a film canister, so an old school little film roll pot. To get hold of those nowadays, the only way I could find to get hold of them was you had to buy a pack of 100. So if anybody listening would like 99 film pots, then you're more than welcome to, because I've got loads kicking around because I only need one. But the smaller birds go in the film pots. By the time you get to greenfinch size, then I've got to reach for my vitamin C tub, which I've chopped the top off. And then when you're getting up to starling blackbird, then I've got a nice hot chocolate tub that they go in like that. So yes, that's the pots. But the pots go down very well on social media. People like the
It
pots.
kind of reminds me of videos that I do where I show the pots that people choose to send deceased birds to me in. So things like ice cream, Wall's ice cream, cornetto boxes, and it's amazing because you need a vessel that's the appropriate size, and often people
Yeah.
just kind of reach for something that's localized, but it always does
Yeah.
make me smile, the choices. I've had a blackbird in a Hovis bag. I mean, just really cute things. And I'll make sure I absolutely plug all of your videos because they're actually really educational and informative, as well as being ultra cute. So it ticks all the boxes. But I'd love to go back a little bit. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but you've done a lot of ornithological research and various work opportunities around the world. It's taken you all over. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what those other opportunities have looked like, not just what you do today, but the kind of research projects and being in the field.
Yeah. So I was where, like I say, I've been involved in bird ringing for a long time, always been involved in birds, and I knew I wanted to do stuff with them. I knew I wanted to be involved with research. I didn't know what that was going to take, but I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing something with them. And when I was at sixth form, so when I was 16, 17, 18, just before uni, I went to a school that offered this trip to Honduras with a company called Operation Wallacea. And Operation Wallacea basically, they're a science organization, and they run expeditions to remote and underexplored parts of the world in general. And the way they fund it is they allow biology students, university students to come along and help out with the science and get this really unique experience, to whether it's to put on CVs, whether it's to network, etc. You go in the jungle and you can stay for 2 weeks to 2 months or whatever, and you can work with these scientists. My school offered this trip to all of its biology students. This funds the research that Operation Wallacea do, because it's not cheap to go on one of these things. And I had to get a job in a garden centre because my mum was like, I'm not paying for this. So I had to get a job in a garden centre selling things, trowels and pitchforks and things like this. But actually, I told most people to go to Wilco's because it was a lot cheaper.
Closed down now.
But I know, you can't even go there anymore. So I managed to raise the money to go to Honduras, and I joined Operation Wallacea with my school. We went there and we did a week in the jungle and a week then diving on the reefs in the sort of Caribbean Sea off Honduras. And Operation Wallacea, I just thought the setup they had was amazing. I loved the research they were doing. And when I finished my degree at uni, I did zoology. I just got in touch with them and just said, I'd been out with you as a student for 2 weeks. I've got all this bird experience. I would love to join you guys as an ornithologist. And I sent off that application, and then a few weeks later I got a call, and it was their sort of head scientist, and he said, yeah, we've looked at your application, do you want to go to Indonesia? And I was like, for 2 months? And I was like, yeah. Where is it? I didn't even know where it was at that point. So I had to there was 21. I remember sitting in the computer hall at University of Leeds when I got the call. And so then I went to Sulawesi, which is this incredibly endemic island. After Madagascar, it's the island with the second most amount of endemic wildlife. So I went to Sulawesi and I spent 2 months there. You're in tents, you're in hammocks, you've got very little access to electricity and internet and stuff like that. And you've got all these students, just like I was, alongside you, and you're getting them involved in the field work in the ways that they can, and you're demonstrating and you're showing. And I think my years doing that, I then subsequently the following summer, I went to Honduras with them. And then the summer after that, I went to Dominica in the Caribbean. And then I went to Madagascar the summer after that. And I really loved because some of the scientists are there for the science and maybe less so for the engagement side of it. But I found that I really loved talking to the students and just getting them involved in birds. So I did that, and that was great. And we published some papers out of it on some of the birds in these remote areas of Madagascar, and published some papers on survey methods in tropical forests from Sulawesi. I did some stints at bird observatories in places like Canada and Sweden, where they're just areas that are set up to basically monitor, to bird ring like 24 hours a day, to catch as many of these migrating birds as possible, to see where they go to. So I was able to use the bird experience, especially the ringing experience, to get about a bit and see some amazing things.
Well, the bird life that you've seen across the
Mm.
world is quite something. Does English or British birds still excite you?
That's a great question, because actually I am now. I've come when I was at like early 20s. I was so convinced that I was going to go and live in somewhere like South Africa or Australia or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and then I don't know. I'm now fully back on the British wildlife bandwagon. Like, it is my everything, because I think there are so many conversations going on. There are so many issues that we need to address in the UK. Like, we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and there are so many exciting conversations going on right now about land use and how we can make the space better for nature and everything like that. But I'm quite a sentimental person, I think, and I think it means more, like the British wildlife, and it means more because I grew up with it. And that's why it means more to me. So an exciting rare bird in Madagascar is an incredible experience, but the return of the swifts every year to my street is just it will never be topped.
Yeah. It is such a evocative. There's a real emotion in recognition as well. When you see something familiar, it's like coming home.
Yeah.
We all have that. Sorry, after you.
No, you're exactly right. It stirs like memories, and it stirs I remember places from being a kid because of the birds that I saw there. Like, my mum will say, "Oh, do you remember when you were 7 and we went to whatever?" And I'll go, "Oh, is that where we saw the red kites?" So it's my memory of places is sort of like fused in the feathers of the things that I saw there. So it runs very, very deep, and British wildlife now is what I'm all about.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, it really is the kind of bedrock for all of the work that the BTO and ornithologists do is coming from a place of love. Do you ever experience any criticism or any difficulties, conflicts? What are the issues and challenges of the work that you do?
I think I get, and you'll sympathise with this, I'm sure, when it comes to social media.
I know what you're going to say.
I get called all sorts of stuff, and I get why, because I always try very, very hard when I'm doing my bird ringing videos to think about if this is the first time, because the thing with social media is you have no idea which videos are going to blow up, which videos are going to go beyond your circle, how they're, and TikTok especially. TikTok has been, since I started putting stuff on there, it's just chaotic, but in an amazing way. The potential that it has to catapult your video in front of people that may have never even considered birds in their entire life, and all of a sudden I'm sticking one upside down in a film canister in front of their head, like faces. But because of that, I do regularly get quite a lot of comments that are just people having a go, and that's because they're having a knee-jerk reaction to a bird being caught, and I get that. I get people that are concerned for the bird's welfare, but bird ringing or any invasive sort of animal studying method does trigger emotions in people. So I try and make it as educational as possible. I try and always explain in the videos why the birds are being caught. But it's getting bird ringing communication right is quite important, and also something that is really drilled into you as a bird ringer. And it means that for quite a long time, well, a lot of people, especially because it's starting to change quite a bit now, but a lot of bird ringers were sort of older people who were especially also wary of social media and stuff like that. It's always been people have always been very wary, and I get why, because there are some challenges in communicating that. But I think as long as you do it openly, as long as you yourself are convinced that, well, you're following the guidelines and you're not doing anything wrong whatsoever, then there is nothing wrong with sharing what we do. But I know you get it quite a lot.
Now is not the time. We'd be here all night. Jack, you mentioned there that, you're putting content in front of people's faces that you might not know about your industry. Has your industry been historically quite a closed and inaccessible place? And can you speak to why that might have been?
I think one is it's quite niche. So I think there's a couple of things. I think it's quite niche. I think you just see it and you immediately think. I get asked all the time on my social media videos, how do I get a job like this? And I'm like, well, when you find out, let me know, because it's not my job. I'm not getting paid to do it. So I think that speaks to the fact that people see it and think it's quite an inaccessible thing straight away. I just think people think, oh, well, I'm not that person that can do that. And Eleanor, the person who trained me, she, in a 9 to 5, she installed Wi-Fi routers, but in a alternate life, she was she'd got she was a bird ringing trainer. So I think one is the perception of it. For a long time, and it still is largely, although like I say, it is changing. It was run by a lot of old white guys, which there's some lovely old white guys, but also a lot of bird ringers though who get into it. They like the birds and they might not necessarily be the most friendly or the most open or blah blah blah. But also the social media thing, I think, is a big thing, because given the demographic that were mostly ringing birds, it just wasn't something that was shouted about very much. And it's something that people were always quite cautious about talking about. I know when I was getting into it, it was always very, oh, don't post that. Be careful how you post this. And that's not to dismiss any of that stuff, because it is all very important. You do want to make sure, there's some great birds that I would have loved to have made videos about that I didn't make videos about because it wasn't right in that moment. And because the birds, it wouldn't have been the right thing to do for that bird. We needed to process it fast. Perhaps it was a bit too cold to get the camera out and start faffing around. So it's always just been a bit, people have always been a bit cautious. So basically we've not shouted about it much, I don't think. I think that's the thing, is to get into it is relatively easy. If you live near a bird ringing trainer and they've got space and you can get to them and it's not too far away, then you can go and learn how to do this. Anyone can go and learn how to do this if you're dedicated to do it. But I just don't think that was communicated very well. And I was lucky that someone was living in the next village to me. And now I'm quite lucky that I get lots of messages of people saying, how do I get into this? So I think, this is just, that's the thing I always like to impress on people, is this is something you can do. Like, you listening, if you want to go and do this, you watching, if you're watching my things, you can go and do it, or you can at least explore the possibility of doing it. And if there's someone right in your area, you can get out there and do it.
I think that's a great rally cry. I mean, it's really exciting to see that kind of industry be portrayed in the mainstream. That's kind of why I started this podcast, is to talk to people who are they have roles in niche industries and need their voices amplified. Is there a much requirement for bird ringing? I mean, is there the kind of jobs for it?
So this is the thing with bird ringing, is in terms of like the requirement from a science level, very, very high. We're going through this unprecedented change of climate and habitat, change and all this sort of stuff. And being able to have our finger on the pulse on such an intimate level as knowing how birds' weights change and things like that is like an incredibly powerful thing to have. In terms of a skill, it's also very valuable. I'll always remember my university professor, who was my tutor, saying when he gave a talk that bird ringing is not something that he was sort of saying, things that you can get involved with to make yourself stand out. He was like, at one end you've got, and he was like, I'm going to choose one of the most extreme examples. And I remember him choosing bird ringing because he said, it's not necessarily about the bird ringing thing, but immediately to anybody who knows what it involves, it's not just about the physical skills of having the license, but it shows a level of dedication to something.
Yeah.
It shows that you are the kind of person that will do X, Y, Z. But then as the actual physical skill, it is very valued because there are all sorts of specialist projects that are wanting people who are licensed to catch and tag birds safely. So the RSPB, every year around January time, they advertise a load of jobs for that spring, which might be tagging lapwing chicks, or it might be colour ringing ring ouzels up in the uplands, and they need people to do that have got bird ringing experiences. There's bird observatories around the UK, fantastic ones in Fair Isle, Shetland, Spurn Bird Observatory, Portland, Bardsey, all these amazing bird observatories that monitor bird movements, particularly in migrations, throughout those key periods. And the people they need there are people who can catch and tag birds. So there are jobs out there for it. There's unfortunately not many full-time. It's very, very hard to be just paid to ring. Bird observatories is the closest that you'll get to that, and even then quite a lot of those are seasonal. But as a skill to have, and if you're quite happy, hopping around different contracts, which is great because you get to go, it can take you all over the world, then it's definitely in demand. There are 3,000 bird ringers in the UK. The bird ringing license in the UK is often seen quite favourably around the world because of the amount of dedication that we put in, and the fact that the training does take so long. So it is quite widely regarded throughout the world. So it can be quite a good passport to do some pretty exciting things in some exciting places.
Absolutely. I mean, you're a testament of that. So you're not installing Wi-Fi routers, but what do you do day to day that sort of complements your wonderful work and dedication in the ringing?
So my day job is I work for the watchers. So Springwatch and now Winterwatch, formerly Autumnwatch, but no longer. So yes, Springwatch and Winterwatch is what I work on and have done for the last 5 years, I think it's been. So I'm a wildlife researcher, and my job is, I am the wildlife researcher. This is a really thing. So my title is the wildlife researcher. And I feel like it's a really strange title because, of course, every researcher on the Watchers is researching wildlife. But my job in particular is slightly different to everybody else's, who they are more focused on building the individual episodes that you see on BBC Two when it's broadcast and stuff like that. Whereas I have more of an overarching view. It's my job to find the locations that we go to, or to help find the locations that we go to go and recce them, to find the stories that we're going to tell there. When we're on location, it's my job to be across all the stuff that's being filmed from our remote camera truck, where we have cameras in birds' nests and all this sort of thing, to what the long lens camera operators are going out and about and filming. The best bit about my job is I get to really, wherever our base is going to be. So right now, as we speak, we are broadcasting the forthcoming Springwatch. Our main base is in Dorset.
Oh, lovely. And
what I get to do is I get to plug myself into all the naturalists in that area, the people studying, the people monitoring, the Wildlife Trust, the National Trust, the RSPB, all these people. I basically have these little birds, these little spies that tell me what's around. When we're there on site, Springwatch, we're there for a month, and my phone it's just buzzing with there's bee eaters turned up down the road, and then it's my job to find who the landowner is and then try and send one of our camera operators out there before the bee eaters fly away. So it's really cool. It's really you get to do lots of cool things. So it's a bit of everything. I love it, really. And the key thing I really love about working for Springwatch is the insight that we get into the birds that we look at. Birds particularly, obviously, but the stuff that we've recorded with our Nest cameras that watch those nests 24 hours a day. So we put tiny cameras watching the nests, and we have people who are paid to watch those cameras 24 hours a day. And we have 30 screens all running at the same time. And there is no other job in the world. There's nothing else in the world where you can sit in front of a screen and you can see 30 different nests. And in a lifetime of being the most hardcore ornithologist you could imagine, you could never get the insight that you get in half an hour of sitting in the Springwatch truck. And that's why I love the show that I work on, and that's why really I think my only job in TV will be with the Watchers, because there is no other TV job out there that has what Springwatch has. And we've recorded stuff that in British wildlife, which has been studied for hundreds of years, documented for hundreds of years. You know, we are a country of naturalists going back. Every year we find something new. Like last Springwatch, we were open-mouthed when a female nightjar that we'd got, we watched her hatch 2 eggs, and within 24 hours, she picked up one of her chicks and swallowed it alive. Just straight down, wriggling, still wriggling, straight down. Never recorded before in any nightjar species anywhere in the world. We got in touch with all these experts before we broadcast the footage, being like, "Why? What's happening? They're only supposed to eat insects. Yeah. Is she going to cough up a pellet? What is she going to do?" We had no idea what she was going to do, why she did it, and nobody else did. Everyone. No, we spoke to these nightjar experts, and they're like, "This is the first time anywhere in the world this is like nightjar cannibalism has ever been recorded."
Niche.
So that's why I do this job, because there's nowhere else where I can sit and nerd out about nightjar cannibalism and then get to watch it broadcast later that night on BBC Two.
Yeah,
it's great.
Well, the team did so well in having you work for them, because your passion and charisma just oozes out, and it's so inspiring. And I know that probably sounds patronizing, but hearing people interested in their authentic stuff, maybe stuff that might have been stigmatized or relegated to you being nerdy, you being geeky, it being a bit weird, it's cool to be interested in stuff. And I love listening to you. Jack, I could talk to you all evening. I know you're very busy and I do have to let you go. However, I would like to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about your podcast as another finger in pie. Go on.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is talking about, that's quite a nice segue actually that you've said there, talking authentically, because I think the great thing about, like this podcast here and this wave of people our age that are coming through and making content, and people younger than us that are coming through making content, is people are talking about nature in ways that really hasn't been represented that much. Yeah. My problem as I got older with nature coverage on TV specifically was that when you were a kid, it was young and it was exciting, and people were running around and it was exciting and it was funny and it was whatever. And then you got to adults and it's all very hushed whispers and everything's awesome and amazing. And sometimes, like, talking about nature, we should be talking about nature in the same way that we're talking about anything else. So sports, films, we should be taking the mick out of it. We should be having a laugh about it. We should be making memes out of it. We should be doing all the things we do. And when I was away on these expeditions, they were the conversations you would have with like-minded people around the campfire, or when you were killing time, is you would tell them the mad stories that stuck in your mind that you'd learnt about. Anyway, one of these people in Madagascar was a guy called Roddy Shaw, and we became quite good friends, having spent 2 months together in Madagascar. And a couple of years after that, we were still having chats back and forth and stuff, and I just said, I think we should maybe have a go at making a podcast, because I think, and I'm very self-aware about 2 white guys saying they should maybe make a podcast, because especially in their 30s, that's everybody. There was a period in time where that was more or less everybody. But we did, and we were quite dedicated to making sure, okay, we want to make sure that people learn something from this. And the structure of it is we go away and we research a topic, and that topic can be anything from a deep dive into behaviors like parasitism, mutualism. One of my favorite ones was we did this study into this thing called the necrobiome, where a herd of radiators. I glanced at the radiator to my side.
It's been a long day.
And said a herd of radiators. I meant a herd of reindeer.
Different.
A herd of reindeer were struck by lightning, like 300 of them,
Wow.
Killed instantly on the spot in Norway, all died. And instead of cleaning them up, the Norwegian authorities camera trapped it and turned it into a massive study thing, and looked at the scavengers that were coming, but also how the breakdown of the bodies changed the chemical composition of the soil, and then allowed different plants to grow there than would have been able to grow before. So we go into stuff like the necrobiome and things like that, and we also talk about the time Australia went to war with its emus and lost, and all sorts of sort of more mad things. So but the point is that you're talking about them as though you were talking about them if you were down the pub with somebody who had a similar interest in nature. It's supposed to be a lot more lighthearted and a lot more easy listening.
Jack, you are the most wonderful science communicator. I'm still here for the pots, but also everything else that you said. I'll make sure to put all of the links to everywhere that we can find you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you for my show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Jack for his time speaking with me. I loved that episode. I love all the episodes, but when they're about birds, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. I really hope that it was 10 out of 10 for you too, and I hope that you will go and find Jack, especially for the videos of the pots. His Instagram and TikTok are at JABaddams, that's JABADDAMS, and you can listen to his podcast, How Many Geese, over on Spotify, Podbean, and iTunes. You can find me in all the usual places. I'm at Elle Kaye Taxidermy on Instagram and at SpecimensPod for the podcast as well. We also have some beautiful new podcast artwork designed by previous podcast guest Madison Mayfield, so go and check that out, and I'll see you next time.